Welcome back, everybody. Today we've got the top 12 NFL draft wide receivers ahead of the 2026 NFL draft. I want to highlight the top 12 guys to really give you a visualization of what I think they could project to be in the NFL. So I added some player comps as well, so you guys can actually picture how they'll be able to project at the next level. But drop a comment, who is your favorite wide receiver prospect? I am curious to see in the comments below. And hit that subscribe button. And let's start it off at number 12. It is going to be Jacoby Lane. He was teammates with Mekhi Lemon at USC. Didn't get nearly the enough hype as well as Lemon did. However, in 2024, he actually outperformed Lemon. He had 700 yards and 11 receiving touchdowns, but he dropped off a little bit going into this past season, finished with 700 receiving yards again on 60 catches, but only 4 touchdowns, as this team really focused in on Mekhi Lemon to be their wide receiver 1. So I think Jacoby Lane still has an abundance of potential still left to offer. He was definitely projected to be a higher pick in this draft a year ago, but with the USC quarterback transitioning away from Miller Moss going into his final season, you saw him kind of shift into that wide receiver 2 role, which definitely decreased his targets, especially in the red zone. So there's still a lot of upside drafting Jacoby Lane, and I think a player comp for him is going to be Keon Coleman. And I say that with no disrespect at all. I'm more so talking about Keon Coleman's kind of athletic traits and his ability to high point the ball, contested catch, especially in the red zone. I'm not saying Jacoby Lane is going to be kind of the off the field product that Keon Coleman has been, nothing of that nature, but Jacoby Lane I think could be a steal of this draft. Some teams I would have my eye on for him as far as landing spots go would be Miami, to pair a big 6'4 wide receiver with Jalen Waddle, as well as the New York Jets, to try and kind of give this New York offense some more weapons, especially at the wide receiver position. I think he would complement Garrett Wilson very well, and this way you set up your young quarterback with great success, especially at the wide receiver playmakers. So Jacoby Lane comes in at 12, and then at 11, it is actually going to be Chris Bell. My player comp for him is Alec Ayomanor. He also has shades of Deebo Samuel in him. He stands at 6'2". He plays a lot bigger. He's a big body wide receiver, and he's kind of known for these yards after the catch, just kind of fighting through tackles. He operates in the intermediate, kind of over the middle space here. He's absolutely great against zone coverage, and unlike Jacoby Lane, he actually did have Miller Moss in his senior year, so that's where he went to Louisville, and he really showed up for Chris Bell. The main red flag is his availability. He needs to be able to stay on the field. Injury concerns have definitely been kind of plaguing Chris Bell throughout his college career. However, he definitely still has some upside in the tank. He just ran a 4.37, and he's not really known for being a speedster as far as that draft wide receivers, but Chris Bell has been shooting up my draft board as the weeks climb closer to the draft, and I think some teams that could really look to kind of pair their wide receivers with Chris Bell would be the Commanders as a landing spot. You just lost Deebo Samuel, so trying to pick up the pieces and really kind of recapture that slot and kind of over the middle, yards after the catch role, I think Chris Bell fits perfectly, as well as Pittsburgh to pair with DK Metcalf, who is the bigger body kind of wide receiver that can operate towards the boundaries and in the red zone, but then you could have Chris Bell operating underneath and kind of in that more intermediate kind of area of interest for the wide receiver core. I think this would be a perfect complement for Pittsburgh. So Chris Bell comes in at 11, and then at number 10, it is going to be Chris Brazzell, another guy that ran a surprisingly fast time with a 4.4 40-yard dash. He is a 6'5 wide receiver, and I think this pro comp was easy for me. It's going to be Quentin Johnston. They play very, very similar. He finished with double-digit touchdowns, and he's an absolute beast in the red zone. However, he also is kind of known for his deep ball ability. He is fast enough to get and beat you downfield, but you throw him a 50-50 ball, and it's almost like a 70-30 ball for Chris Brazzell. I think he is actually going to be one of the steals in this draft. Some teams that could definitely use kind of that big body X wide receiver. I think you could pair him in New England with Kayshon Boutte to operate on the outside, and any team that kind of operates more in that short kind of slot wide receiver roles. I think Seattle could also use some depth at wide receiver. JSN isn't the biggest of the bunch at wide receivers. I know they have an abundance of talent, but getting a big wide receiver on the outside just makes a defense's kind of life a more of a nightmare trying to guard the big wide receiver as well as all the other weapons on the offense. So I think he can be a great goal line and deep ball threat similar to Quentin Johnston. Obviously still a raw prospect, but with the correct development, I think he could definitely be a serviceable wide receiver 2 in this league. And then at number 9, we've got Elijah Surratt at wide receiver for the Indiana Hoosiers, who just came off the College Football Playoff National Championship. And I think his player comp is going to be Trey Harris. Obviously, a raw prospect, Trey Harris is, but as far as their skill set goes, they are very, very similar. I think Trey Harris is slightly weaker in the red zone. Elijah Surratt finished 2026 with 15 receiving touchdowns. He's an absolute beast, especially in the red zone. I think if you're a team trying to get that championship pedigree is always a great kind of sign for a wide receiver. I think he is as reliable as they come. They were always targeting him on third down. If they weren't going deep to Charlie Becker, it was likely going to Elijah Surratt. He is kind of the one kind of attribute of the Indiana offense that has NFL talent on the outside, and I think he's going to prove that at the pro level. I think he still has a lot of potential as far as developing his route tree. I think he wasn't used to his fullest potential at Indiana, just knowing that they had many ways to beat you as the offense went, and they were always in blowout games. So I think if you put him in an offense that is throwing the ball more, you can definitely see his production skyrocket. Some teams that I could definitely make note of for landing spots would be the Kansas City Chiefs. Pairing him with Rashee Rice would be a great fit. They kind of operate in the same area, but I think they could complement each other very well, as well as Baltimore, who is in need of kind of this Elijah Surratt build, a 6'2 wide receiver that can kind of do almost everything. You have the slot in Zay Flowers, and Rashad Bateman really hasn't lived up to the fullest of the expectations after signing him to the new deal. So you bring in Surratt. I think those two teams are great landing spots for Elijah Surratt. And then moving on to number 8, it is actually going to be Jeremy Bernard, the wide receiver from Alabama. His pro comp is definitely going to be Jacoby Myers, and I say that because he is more of a zone beater in the sense that he gets open in the middle of the field. He's great, has great IQ as far as sitting down in the soft spot of the zone. He really wasn't used until the back half of the season, which I thought was a little bit surprising. They obviously wanted to get their young, youthful potential star Ryan Williams the ball a whole lot, but once they kind of abandoned that and gave it to the guys that were getting open, Jeremy Bernard was a focal point of this Alabama offense that really started to click in the second half of the season, finishing with almost double-digit touchdowns on the season. He's a wide receiver that I really like going into the NFL draft, and every single week that goes by, I think he could actually go higher and higher due to the pedigree that he was coming out of high school, and now just finally finding his stride in his last few months at Alabama. I think could just be scratching at the surface of what he actually becomes at the pro level. So him and Jacoby Myers, I think, are very under-the-radar wide receivers going into the NFL level, and I think similar to Myers, he just doesn't get the respect that he really should have. If he was more of a flashy playmaker at Alabama, you would have heard his name a lot more by now. But some teams that I could definitely see going after Bernard would definitely be someone in the kind of NFC South range. I know there's a lot of young quarterbacks, and being able to take that high upside wide receiver, whether it is a team like New Orleans or Carolina, to pair Jeremy Bernard with Tyrone McMillan would make a whole lot of sense for that offense, and I think he could be a perfect fit. So Jeremy Bernard comes in at number 8. And then at number 7, it is actually going to be Casey Concepcion. He may get drafted higher than this. I'm slightly below expectation as far as his draft cost. However, he is a stud. He's a 5'11 wide receiver from Texas A&M. He predominantly operates in the slot, but also came over from NC State after a few years, transitioned into this Texas A&M offense, and was a stud from day one. So I don't think he'll have any concerns getting adjusted to a new offense in the NFL. He's very twitchy after the catch, and I think his pro comp is Jaden Reed, because although he is great at those short targets designed kind of wide receiver screens, he can also beat you down the field. He has great speed, and I think his quickness is going to find his way into maybe the late first round, early second. So some teams that I would definitely have my eye on would be the Texans and the Steelers. So two teams that have big X wide receivers in Nico Collins and DK Metcalf. Being able to find the slot wide receiver of the future is definitely of their main focus going into the next season. And I think Casey Concepcion could be that from right away from day one. Obviously, his size is a little bit of a concern, kind of his frail kind of build, but I think if he's able to put on a little bit more weight and be able to take more hits at the pro level, he could definitely develop into being a top wide receiver 2 guy that is open on every single third down. So watch out for Concepcion to be a star in this league. And then at number 6, we've got Antonio Williams, the wide receiver from Clemson. This is actually a guy that I'm way higher on. He's probably found in many other rankings in the 10 to 12 range. However, I find him as my wide receiver 6 here, and I say this because, yes, he is similar to KC in the sense that he's 5'11", but he plays much bigger. He's great at contested catches down the field. We've seen this throughout his career, and his pro comp is definitely Devontae Smith, because although Smith is a smaller wide receiver, you can also see him make all the contested catches that the big body wide receivers make. Antonio Williams fits that same mold, and in 2025, he was finished with over 1,000 yards and 11 touchdowns. In this past season, however, an injury-plagued year where he didn't play almost any of the games. So I think that kind of drove his draft stock down the drain, but I'm not going to kind of make one mistake on one year that he missed a lot of games and allowing it for me to miss out on a stud here. So if you're a team in the third round, I think you could actually get a first-rounder type potential for Antonio Williams. He's another guy that before this season was a projected first-rounder. That was kind of goes for a lot of the Clemson offense. They just never could stay healthy and stay on the field. So Antonio Williams comes in at number 6. And then at number 5, we've got Zachariah Branch, the wide receiver from Georgia. Similar to Casey, he operates in the slot. He's a little bit bigger, but he's predominantly known for his speed. He just ran a 4.35 40-yard dash. This is incredible for any wide receiver in the draft, and I think he's going to be a complete steal in this draft. Some teams I would kind of keep my eye on would be the Titans. As far as getting a young wide receiver to pair with Cam Ward is certainly something that they're trying to do in this Brian Daboll offense. I think he would make them very dynamic. And from a pro comparison type standpoint, I think he fits the Zay Flowers mold where he can beat you over the top as well as in the slot. He's very twitchy and kind of shifty, tough to cover. And at Georgia, he really wasn't used as the wide receiver 1 until the back half of the season. You saw this in the college football playoff when he was the focal point of the offense. Everything started to hum a little bit better. So don't be surprised if Branch really takes off in year 1 now that he finds his stride in an offense with coordinators that can actually get him the ball correctly. So Zachariah comes in at number 5 here. And then into the top 4, we're going to have Denzel Boston, the wide receiver from Washington. He is 6'4". He's a bigger wide receiver. 11 touchdowns in 2026 is incredible for a red zone threat. Some player comp that I would have for him is Michael Pittman because a lot of his catches are actually down the field. He's not known for kind of the slant and kind of all these quick routes. I think that's something that he has to work on in order to be a full pro-level wide receiver. However, if you're looking for him in the red zone, he is as good as they come as far as high pointing the ball. Similar to Michael Pittman, he plays physical down the field. I think teams are going to be all over him in the first round. And like I said earlier, there's teams with kind of the shorter wide receivers that are in need of a bigger X wide receiver, similar to the Ravens and the Dolphins, who have Zay Flowers and Jalen Waddle operating as their wide receiver 1s, but they could really use that physical presence on the outside. I think this makes a lot of sense for Denzel Boston for a landing spot potential, but he is almost certainly going to be in the first round and has almost as good upside as this big tier 1 group of the 3 wide receivers. So there's definitely a clear tier gap here. So let's get into the top 3, and I will say that the margins between these 3 are so thin, but coming in at number 3, it's going to be Jordan Tyson. Really the one detriment of his game that kind of held him below these top 2 guys is his availability. So hasn't been able to stay healthy for a full season at Arizona State really too recently. Missed games, but like he said at the Combine, if he's able to stick to a program that he kind of believes in and trusts, I think you could see the best of him going forward. His pro comp is going to be CD Lamb, and I say this because he can do it on every single avenue of the NFL field. His route tree is everywhere. He can play the X. He can play in the slot. He's 6'2". He's kind of perfect wide receiver size as far as the youth that are taking over in the CD Lamb and JSN type build. So I think teams are going to be all over him. Some teams that will definitely try and get Jordan Tyson. If Buffalo is able to trade up, I think he would pair very well with Khalil Shakir in the slot, as well as other teams at the top, whether the Browns or the Dolphins. He is going to be a hot commodity on the drafts as long as all the medicals go the right way. I think he could actually be the first wide receiver taken, but we're just splitting hairs in the top 3. So let's get to number 2. It is actually going to be Carnell Tate, the wide receiver from Ohio State. We always see these guys perform well in the NFL after the college years. So the main concern I have with him is just playing alongside Jeremiah Smith, who gets doubled every single play. It's just how often is he going to be able to beat man coverage by himself if he's the wide receiver 1? I have no doubts that he's able to do so, but it's something to monitor. He did run a 4.54 in the 40, which was a little bit slower compared to all the other wide receivers, but I wouldn't make too much of it. The bigger deal was him coming in at 6'2". He was listed at Ohio State as 6'4". He definitely plays big, especially down the field. That's why I have the player comp as Devontae Adams. He's a smooth route runner, so you'll see him get open in yards of separation, kind of better than anyone in this draft. So I think Carnell Tate could be my wide receiver 2. And then coming in at number 1, it's going to be Mekhi Lemon, the wide receiver from USC. We started at number 12 with his teammate, but now we finished at number 1. He is 5'11", finished 2026 with 1,100 yards and 11 touchdowns. Really broke out this year, and he's slightly psychotic as far as his combine interviews. But a pro comp for him is going to be Jalen Waddle. I could also see Amon-Ra St. Brown. Just his ability to wiggle in the slot is incredibly impressive. And I think teams at the top are going to be absolutely diving for Mekhi Lemon here. So the teams I mentioned earlier, Tennessee at number 4 could even look for him, as well as Cleveland and Miami. So those top wide receiver locations are definitely going to be looking after Mekhi Lemon. He was the best wide receiver in the country this past season, and the future is bright for my number 1 wide receiver in the draft. And that is going to do it. So drop a comment. Who is your favorite wide receiver prospect in this NFL draft? And hit that subscribe button before you go. And that is going to do it. Peace.